Hi, I am Mrs. Sloan, and this video is for my AP Biology students. My background's a little bit different. I'm not at home, I'm at school because we've returned there. So here we go. This is the beginning of Unit 8 for us. And so let me make myself a little smaller. Get rid of this and get in presentation mode. Okay, so this, if you click on this, if you download, my notes are always given in a way so that there are 2 column notes. Column 1 are the scaffolding for what you need to know, and I'll help you fill those in. And column 2, I encourage you to put in pictures. And there are links to my notes down at the bottom that also contains a link to this entire presentation. And within it, you will see a link to my unit guides, and these are per the College Board, the expectations. So we are now transitioning into the last one, Unit 8 on ecology. And this particular discussion, we're going to focus more on 8.1 and 8.2. And so, what I want you to pay, you could pause if you wanted to, and you could read through. These are some of the expectations we will discuss throughout this chapter. And also here, energy flow through ecosystems. So I'm going to start talking about our behavior by talking about Lorenz. That's this gentleman right here. And what he did is these baby geese, he removed their mother and he shook his head back and forth in front of them, and they imprinted upon him as mother and then followed him wherever he went. If he went swimming, they went swimming. If he went in the house, they went in the house. So there's 2 things that are here. One, there's a genetic basis of inheritance because they were genetically predisposed that whatever waved in front of them, that they would attach as the parent. They learned who that parent was due to their environment, and that was him instead of their mother. And that's the first thing we're going to discuss. If you look in our group share notes, I will too. 43.1 is how much of our behavior is inherited. Okay, let me grab this. Maybe not. Here we go. All right. And I am also going to get a pointer real quick. So we're going to look at a few different experiments in lovebirds and snakes and snails and human twins and look to see how much of our behavior is already, we're already going to behave that way because it's in our genes. So yes, there is some behavior that is there. So let's look at 2 species of lovebirds. So there's the Fisher lovebird, and what they do is they cut long strips of nesting material and they carry it back to where they're going to build their nest, and they carry it back in their beak. And then here we have, let me see if I can switch it here. No, I can't. All right. Sorry, different computer. Then you have the peach-faced lovebird, and they do several small fragments for their nest, and they tuck it in their tail feathers, and that's how they build their nest. So they wondered if they had a hybrid, a mix of these 2 species, what would happen? And it so happened that they cut an intermediate length nesting material. Now, what I think about that is I think about flowers where they had incomplete dominance, red flower, white flower, and you ended up getting the pink. Curly hair, straight hair, you get wavy hair, right? So this idea of inheritance. So they would cut these intermediate lengths and they would try to put it in their rump, but they would fall out and like, darn it, and they would go back and pick it up. Eventually, they would carry it back to their nest in their mouth, but they would always take a look at their rump. So on experiments that suggest that behavior has a genetic basis, you have everything for that on the nest building and lovebirds. The one word that you need to put in there is it should produce a hybrid, and it did. Okay, so you just need to pop in the word hybrid into your notes. Okay, another experiment was done with these snakes. So the inland garter snakes, they had no inland, it was too dry and there were not slugs around and they didn't eat slugs. However, the coastal snakes, they liked slugs and they would eat them. And so then they started looking at the number of tongue flicks that the snakes had, because that's how they taste what's in the air. So the coastal garter snakes, they would eat the slugs, they believe, because they had more tongue flicks. And as a result of having more tongue flicks, then they could taste that the slugs were there. Whereas the inland garter snakes, they had fewer tongue flicks, so they were unaware. And sure enough, they did one of those things again where they mixed and crossbred an inland and a coastal garter snake, and it had intermediate number of tongue flicks, so it had an intermediate affinity for slugs. So on your notes for that, underneath 43.1 on the food choice in garter snakes, it turns out to be the number of tongue flicks and the ability to taste the slugs in the air. So that would be genetically predisposed how many times you would flick your tongue. Okay, our third experiment was with identical twins that were raised separately from one another, yet they had so many common behaviors and preferences. They had the same favorite movies, similar mannerisms, and career choices. So they wondered if possibly then, and this was actually an experiment done by a social worker, and it was, I believe he got sued later for it because he wanted to do twin studies. So he purposely separated these identical twins that needed to be adopted into two different homes so he could trace them over their lifetime to see if they had those similarities. And there are many, many cases of this where people have learned out later in life, like they have the same type of job, they both married nurses, they smoked the same cigarettes, yet they were twins separated at birth. So twin studies, twins that were separated at birth show that they have similar food preferences, activity patterns, and even select mates with similar characteristics. All right, then let's do not so much experiments, but observations and studies. Aplisia, which is a shellless, it's like a gastropod without a shell. What it will do is when it starts to lay eggs, it literally lays millions of eggs, and they come out in this slimy gelatinous mass, and it needs to kind of put them all together. So it will grab them and like swing those eggs around and try to swing it into a ball shape, and then they can protect it. And what they found is if they gave it an egg laying hormone and shot it with that hormone, it would lay eggs even though it hadn't copulated. It had not had sex. So all of the eggs and all of that energy that it put into, you would not have any developing offspring from it. So that hormone is what triggered that behavior. So on your notes there on the egg laying behavior in marine snails, egg laying hormone will cause animal to lay more than 1 million eggs, even if it has not mated. Another study in mice, normal mice mothers, if one of their baby mice, they're blind at first, kind of wanders off, brings them back to keep them warm. She hovers over them. Well, they did a study where they were missing the FOSB allele. It was either inactive or missing, and it's called the mothering allele because the mice that didn't have an active copy of that gene, like their babies would wander off and they're like, whatever, peace out. They wouldn't pay any attention. They wouldn't try to keep them warm. So nurturing behavior in mice, maternal behavior, crouch over your young, retrieve them if wandering, is dependent on FOSB alleles being present and activated, being present and activated. And when we're in class, this is a link. If you're at home and you want to watch this, you just click on this picture, and it talks about stress and how we can pass on stress to our offspring as well, and how we can counteract that if we've had a very stressful parent. So I encourage you to watch that on your own time. All right, now the question is, can our environment influence our behavior? And I think we know that it can. This little girl looks like she's in trouble and she's upset. She's obviously got her hands in a little fist here. I think she's probably in timeout. And what the parents are hoping is that that will discourage her from doing that behavior, right? We do a lot of parenting through environmental influences. So the first thing we need to talk about is a fixed action pattern. Now, fixed action that makes sense pattern. For instance, if you haven't read Charlotte's Web, spoiler alert, Charlotte dies in the end, and all of her babies are raised by Wilbur, but they know how to build a spider web. Nobody has to teach them that. So once you have a sign stimulus that releases a particular behavior, it usually goes into completion, and they can build those spider webs. Now, fixed action patterns were thought to be concrete and would not change to their environment, but it turns out they can get better. So just a little review of these. Another behavior that's a FAP is goose and egg rolling. If one of their eggs rolls out of their nest, they will go and, touch the front and touch the back, and then I forget, there is an order there. And then they carefully roll the egg back into their nest. Well, they have done this with eggs that are fake eggs and glued a little string to it, and they will rip the egg away mid fixed action pattern, and she won't stop. She'll roll nothing into her nest. And then they realize that it just takes a round curved object as a releaser to trigger that behavior. You can put a can of soup out there and she'll touch the front and the back and slowly roll the can of soup out, back into the nest. So another example of that people talk about are like mating dances. Fixed action patterns are some sort of releaser, and then they start going into that particular dance. And another one is with the stickleback fish. And this was the part 2 to show about how the environment can still influence it. They will defend their breeding territory against males who have a red underbelly, and so they'll go and attack. But if they are presented with models of it, unrealistic models, ones that, don't even look like fish, but they have this heavy red coloring, they will attack that as well and even get better at those attacks. So on your notes for fixed action patterns, you just need male stickleback fish aggressively defending a territory against anything that has a red color, So this brings us then to learning. Learning is a change in behavior brought about by experience. The word you need there is experience. For instance, one is habituation. So animals in the zoo, like if you go around and you're trying to see the animal, you want the lion to roar. If you're in a zoo situation and you're like, tapping on the cage, the lion's going to ignore you. And if you're like, hey, lion, he's going to ignore you because he knows he can't get you, right? But if you are out, in natural environment and you're like, hey, lion, roar, he's going to get you. So animals know they know to respond to certain stimuli, but they can learn, hey, I can't get out of this cage, or it's not hunting season, nobody's going to shoot me. That is habituation. So habituation, you have all of that already in your notes. Okay, and then this one, these are goals, and so we can see a combination of learning and a fixed action pattern. What happens is the parent birds will come home to the baby gold, and they will have food, whatever they've caught there in their gullet, and then the baby bird will peck on the parent bird's beak and grasp at it. This is a releaser for the mother or parent father bird to regurgitate and give that food to the baby bird. Now, what happens is they have noticed that using models that the pecking accuracy of a newborn versus a 2-day-old, that it increases, that they're better at triggering that release of food to them. Now, could it possibly be that they got better, or maybe their muscles are stronger in their neck, or it could be a combination of both, but they definitely improved over time in order to get that food released. So you have everything you need for instinct and learning and goals in your notes. All right, so this is what's called a weaver bird, and this is just an interesting example if you want to throw in there. The weaver bird starts by finding, when it builds its nest, it will find a stick with an upside down Y. And then it starts in this top part of the nest and closes it off, and then whoops, I didn't mean to do that. And then it starts building this tunnel, and it finishes up down here. So this triggers this in its response to its environment. So if you go to this weaver bird's nest and you kind of unthatch this one area right here, he will not know how to fix it. He only knows how to do this part when he's on this part. Once he's turned the corner, he'll just wonder, like, how come nobody wants to be with me in my nest? He doesn't know how to go back and repair that. He has to abandon it all completely and rebuild again, because he does it in sequence. All right. So next, Let's talk about imprinting. And I talked to you about this Lorenz at the beginning. Baby chicks will follow the first object that moves after they hatch. That's their sensitive period. Hopefully you're thinking in your mind, natural selection, right, would favor those chicks that do that because that's the parent that's going to provide food and nutrients and protect them. So it would select them being able to do that. So imprinting is a form of learning that involves a sensitive period, which is usually the only period during which a particular behavior develops. So Lorenz was like that. They imprinted on him as a parent. Okay. What they did learn with song learning, though, is that there are 3 scenarios here with the white-crowned sparrow. If they hear no other songs, then they will learn how to sing, but they don't know the song in order to draw in a mate or work within a population of white-crowned sparrows. They could play tape songs to the white-crowned sparrow during their sensitive period, and they could learn the song correctly. However, if they had an adult tutor at any time, they would learn that song correctly. So the conclusion on that was that social interactions apparently assist the learning in birds. So social interactions must assist the learning in birds. Now, it's not just seeing and it's not just hearing. You can also have what's called olfactory imprinting. Salmon can leave their stream where they hatch and, join with other tributaries in a river, go out to the open ocean and be out in the open ocean for several years. And then they will literally find where they hatched and work their way all the way back. I can't find my car when I come out of the grocery store and I've only been in there 20 minutes. I'm like, what row is it on? These are fish that have been in the open ocean for years and can swim along a coast and know exactly which river to follow up to get to where they hatch. So that's pretty amazing. And they smell their way there. They smell their way back by the chemicals, right, that are in the water. So that's why another reason when the water gets polluted, then that disrupts their reproductive strategies because they can't find their home stream. So that's another example of imprinting. Okay, now let's talk about associative learning. So associative learning is a change in behavior. That's what you need in your notes. A change in behavior that involves an association between 2 events. An association between 2 events. So if you look at this, I know this kind of sounds sick, but here this particular shot will make somebody super nauseous. Here you have a naughty boy. So when he starts being naughty, you give him a shot that makes him nauseous, and he will then associate, this is a conditioned stimulus now, he will associate naughtiness with getting sick, so maybe he won't be so naughty. I know, we probably shouldn't do that. So here's a monarch butterfly getting eaten by a bird, and he goes to eat this monarch butterfly. It makes him sick. He's now throwing it up. So this would be an example of associative learning. Now, we're going to study a couple different scenarios in associative learning. The first one is classical conditioning. Now, if you've heard of Pavlov's dog, I encourage you should Google it. I didn't put them in this presentation. It looks pretty gross in real life what they had to do in order to collect saliva. But what they did is if your dog was kept away from the food and you just showed them their food, they would have a physiological response of increasing their saliva, and then they would want to eat that food. If you're hungry right now, and I started talking about pizza, if you like pizza or ice cream or cinnamon rolls or lemon cake or chips and salsa, whatever you like, your stomach might start to growl and you might start to salivate because you're thinking about that food and you want it. Well, what Pavlov started doing is before he brought out the food, he would just ring a bell. So ringing a bell doesn't say pizza to me, right? But shortly after ringing the bell, then he would bring the food out. And so after a while, this conditioned response then was all he had to do was ring the bell and they'd start salivating because they knew that food was coming. So this is called classical conditioning. Suggests animals can be trained or conditioned to associate any response if it's involuntary behavior to any stimulus, Let's say dogs that are mistreated and they're hit with a newspaper, pretty soon, if they just see any stimulus, they might cower and in fear because they know what's coming. They're afraid of that newspaper, right? I thought this was kind of a funny joke because this is the dog. Hopefully you catch the irony. As soon as I drool, he'll smile and write in his little book. So he's conditioning Pavlov. Operant conditioning is different. You are motivating correct behavior with a reward or possibly a punishment. And this is voluntary behavior. And the connection is strengthened by reward. This is what goes in your notes, reward/punishment. And you want to remember Skinner and rats. And the Skinner box, you would not want to be put in a Skinner box. But if you did the right thing, you could push this lever. You would get food. If you did the wrong thing, you got an electric shock. All right, so just comparing and contrasting these two, okay? So notice on classical conditioning, a signal is placed before a reflex. It's respondent, it's involuntary behavior, whereas Skinner, okay, this is reinforcing or punishing a stimulus is given after, so it's following, operant. So the way I think of that is operant conditioning is perform the operation and then you'll either get your reward or you will get your punishment. So it works with voluntary behavior. All right. So my question to you is, when we think about dog training, right, is it classical or is it operant conditioning when we think about it? So if you give a reward for them performing a behavior, right? They perform the behavior first, then this would be operant conditioning. So just in case you get a question that has a dog in it, don't assume it's classical conditioning and Pavlov's dog. All right, next, let's talk about migration. So on your notes, you have orientation and migratory behavior. Migration is defined as long distance travel, and I'll hit this at the end of this chapter as well. Long distance travel from one location to another. For instance, loggerhead sea turtles hatch in Florida, and they travel all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Two terms here, orientation and navigation. So orientation is the ability to travel in a particular direction. You're orienting yourself in the right direction and then heading that way. Okay, and there are a lot of studies done with birds, and biological clocks help with this, and the sun. And then to navigate is the ability, and the key word here is to change directions if necessary. So if you get blown off course, can you reorient yourself in the right direction? Then you are navigating. The ability to change direction in response to environmental clues. Birds probably use the Earth's magnetic field in order to do that. And the conclusion on this is that the danger and the cost of these huge journeys must be worth the reward, having more favorable conditions for mating, protection of your young. Otherwise, this behavior would not persist, right? We need to think of all of these things in the form of evolution and natural selection. These types of complex behaviors must increase your fitness overall. So other behaviors under cognitive learning is imitation and observation. So for instance, I don't know if you can see right here, but here's the baby hanging on to the mom, and this baby is going to watch mom wash the these are macaw, Japanese macaw monkeys. And so they will watch the mother wash the sweet potato before she eats it. And then they learn that you wash the sweet potato before you eat it. You might watch your mother or father make spaghetti, and so you make spaghetti the same way. That is observation and imitation. Oh, and that is going to mean there might be students coming in here, so we'll see. Let's see. So the word you want there is by watching others. The next one is insight. Now, I know this looks like a terrible thing. There's no monkeys that do this, but this is solving problems without prior experience. The reason why I always use this particular video is because they do this one where monkeys learned how to stack boxes in order to get bananas. They have not been able to ever repeat that experiment, yet it's in every book. So a better one, okay, to use for insight and having an aha moment is not these mice learning how to get ice cream, but ravens and meat. What happened is they attached meat to a long string and had it dangle down. And if the ravens would fly by, they wouldn't be able to get it. But what they learned to do, they had insight, because most ravens don't deal with meat on a string, is that they would get on top of the branch, reach down, grab the string, pull it up, step on it, and then they could keep repeating that behavior until they could access the meat. So insight is when an animal solves a problem without having any prior experience with the situation. And then that brings us to animal communication. So on animal communication, there on the introduction, I want to say that these are social behaviors for reproduction, raising offspring, and hunting. Communication is an action by a sender that influences the behavior of a receiver. So an action by the sender that may influence the behavior of the receiver. And we're going to talk about 4 different kinds of communication, but I am going to pause real quick. Okay, if I have students come in here, we'll just let them know we're going to just finish up this video real quick. All right, so I want to go through the different types of communication with you. So the first one, and these are really easy. The first one is chemical communication. I'm going to start at 2:40 because I want to finish your vid. Come in, though. The first one is chemical communication, and this one works both day and night, so you want to put that on your notes, effective both day and night. And a pheromone is a chemical signal in low concentration that is passed between members of the same species. So, and I gave you some examples in there in your notes already. So, works both day and night. Okay, and the next one is about auditory communication. Now, auditory communication is going to be faster than chemical communication because chemical communication has to diffuse through the environment, but just shouting at someone works a lot faster. And we will watch a video in class about different I hope I said auditory communication works a lot faster. Sorry. We will watch a video in class. I encourage you to watch it. There is a woman who can like mimic all these different organisms with sound, and it's really good. So the only thing you need there on your notes is faster. Okay, you can combine 2 different signals to be more effective and more specific. So you can combine auditory and visual. You can tell that this dog is angry. It could bark, and also the arrangement of his ears is also a sign, and the look on his face. So on for visual communication, most often used by species that are active during the day because you have to be able to see it. Obviously, there are exceptions to that when you think about like a firefly flashing light, but most visual communication is limited to the daytime. And then the last one I want to go over is tactile communication, and that has to do with touch. A lot of grooming and family behaviors have to do with tactile communication. So the word you want there is information is passed from one animal to another by touch. And I gave you several examples, but the classic one I want you to know is the bee dance. So when you think about watching somebody dance, that's exactly it. You think of them like on a stage performing a dance, but the bee dance is not done that way. You touch the dancer, and this happens in the beehive. So inside the beehive, all the members that want to know that information and that what information is communicated by the dance is location of food, they need to feel the dancer. And what the dancer does is they do a little jiggly movement, and they will wiggle, 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 and then they will come around and then do a wiggle run again and come around. And what they have learned is that you look at the direction, you look at the distance from straight up, which means fly straight towards the sun, and they look at the angle that the dance is done, and this angle is equivalent to going outside and looking at the sun and changing to that same angle, and that gives you the direction. Now, once you know to fly in that direction, you need to know distance, and the waggle run they do here communicates how far. And for bees, the waggles is species specific on how far to fly. So let's just say one bee, a waggle might be 5 feet, but for another bee, it might be 20 feet for each time they do a waggle. So my question to you would be, will this dance change if you did the dance in the morning to tell where the food is, and to do the dance during the late afternoon where the food is? And I hope you're saying yes, because the sun is moving through the sky. And so where the angle in which you do your dance would be different because the sun is moving, but the number of waggles you would do is the same. So on the waggle dance with bees, it tells both direction and distance. direction, and distance. Okay, and then this is a good time to talk quick reminder about circadian rhythms. And this is your 24-hour clock. Like you tend to wake up at the same time, get hungry at the same time, want to go to bed, go to the bathroom at the same time every day. And if you've had a time change, you can see how that is disrupted. And what they have found out is that this biological clock that we have is dependent upon a gene called the period gene. Not getting your period, but periods of time. And it was first discovered by a mutation. And so that is genetically programmed in us to be able to show that change in time over a 24-hour period. So on your notes, biological clock, internal means of telling time requires alterations in the expression of a gene called the period gene. And then that is going to be the close of part 1 for chapter 43. And part 2, we'll talk about behaviors that increase fitness and strategies organisms use to acquire and use energy related to behavior. And if you're one of my students, I'll see you in class.